In this video, I'd like to talk about the use of text functions in Excel. Now, text functions are very important to the analytics process because a lot of the data that's out there is problematic and dirty in some shape or form. Ultimately, you're trying to get data structured in a way that you can throw it into some stats program. Oftentimes, for example, we use pivot tables to slice and dice data. That's one place where we could put it, or we could put it into another program. But in order to do that, we need a structure that's rectangular with rows and columns of nicely defined data, and there are a variety of reasons for which data might come in a poor format, and we might use a programming language as one way to solve that, but in a large number of cases we can fix the data that we're dealing with using text functions. So I'll just jump over to this next tab here for a second and say, for example, what if these rows of data contained actually several columns of information that we're curious about? How could we parse out the parts that we want using Excel without calling a programmer? So to get kind of familiar with what you could do, let me start off with this name here. It says Reggie Miller, and as I mouse around in here, there's three spaces in between there. So I would consider that slightly problematic in that there's extra spaces in the data that don't need to be there. There could also be a space in front of this word and maybe a space after this word phrase, and so we want to account for those kind of things that make data dirty, and at a glance you don't even see what the problem is. I mean, maybe you're doing some function that looks up people by last name or first name, and if the first letter is a space, then it's going to cause a problem. So we want to fix things. One of the things we can do is we can use this function called left to get the first well, as many characters as we want, but in this case we can do left, and we'll reference the cell that we care about, which is A3, and get the first 4 characters. And so the first characters of that are REGG. Similarly, we can go to the right side of this text and grab 4 characters there, and we get the last 4 letters, LLER. Another thing that we can do is trim off the beginning and ending spaces that might be there. And if I recall correctly, this particular trim function will actually get rid of the spaces that may be in between as well. And we'll be able to verify that in just a second. So even though this looks exactly the same as that, if I say use this other function which tells me the length of a particular set of characters, it says that the length of what's in A3 is 15 characters. So it's counting the first word, the second words, and all the spaces in between. And if there were spaces before and after, it would get those too. But this next one says give me the length of C5, and that ends up being 13 characters. So it only left, so it did some smart things. If there had been spaces, it would have gotten rid of the ones on the beginning and the end, but then for the spaces in between words, it knows that that's not grammatically correct, and it will strip out all but one in between words if there are more than one. So we went from 15 characters down to 13. Okay, now this is a important function because in my course you'll get tested on your ability to use this. This is the mid function, and if you're a programmer you might also hear the word substring. So let's contrast this with what we've done before. We got the beginning of words and we got the end of words. What if you needed to pull something out in the middle? So in this case, let's say that we want to go into this phrase, and we want to grab 5 characters and start at space 2. Well, the way we do that, we use the mid function, and we first reference what's the text we want to get a substring out of, and what's our starting character going to be, 1, 2, and then how many characters are we going to go out. In this case, we just arbitrarily picked 5 characters. So that seems relatively simple, but the challenge is you don't always know where your starting character is going to be and how many characters you want to go in the middle of that string. And so oftentimes we'll combine some of these other things like the count or like the length like the length function that we've used before, and possibly some others, so that we're actually not putting in a literal number, but we're actually putting in another function right there which tells us where to start, or how many characters we should go in the middle of the string. So we'll get to that later. Alright, there's a couple different find-like functions where you can locate in a particular string where something's at. So this one is looking for the first space in here, and it identifies it in position 7. And because of these brackets, I can see that it's optional whether to put this last thing on there. I think the default's going to be it's going to start at the beginning of the word, but we're putting it in specifically and forcing it to say you're going to start on 1. So also we can do this next one. It's very similar to that. Instead of looking for a space, we can say where's the first instance of an R. And so if we counted across this text in A3, we will find out that space number 15, and if we recall, that's the last character based on the length of the string. String is another word we use in programming for a list of characters, and so the last character is an R, a lowercase r. Now if you wanted to do an uppercase R, it's kind of similar. You use the search function, but rather than the find function. So real similar. Test it out and decide which one works best for you. Alright, this one is how we can do this thing called concatenate, or combine two different sets of strings and two different blocks of characters, and this has a lot of application in the real world. We'll have columns of data that we need to combine for some reason. So like for example, if we were mapping in a visualization software, and we needed to get not just zip codes but countries and zip codes together to use as an input to our visualization software to differentiate the zip codes that might be the same but in different countries. We would put two things together and then feed it into the software. So in this case it says take A1 and B1 and put them together. So the ampersand connects as many things as we want. So I said first take what's right in this field, add an ampersand, and then put a space. Now I could have also said, you know, put a comma, and then you would see it like that. I can put anything I want in there. I could even put nothing in there. I could, you know, get rid of all that and it would just simply put them together but without a space. So the ampersand is something that combines things together. If you want to put specific text in there other than the cell references, then you would put in you know, some double quotes to surround the thing. So let me just go ahead and put it back to how it was, just in case that looks confusing. Here's another function where we might want to replace things. Sometimes you get bad characters in there. Maybe as you're going from one computer system to another, maybe an exclamation point becomes something weird, or maybe there's, you know, asterisks in there, or who knows. But strange characters can show up at times, and so you might want to replace one type of character with another. And in this case, we're trying to look into this string of text and replace the G's with an N, and we just use the replace function. Go into A3 and do 3 start. Now in this case we actually started at character 3, 1, 2, 3, and then the number of characters we want to go out from there. So we didn't do like a find replace. We just said specifically go in 3 characters, replace 2 characters in a row with this next thing that I'm going to say. Another thing to mention here is how numbers work sometimes. Sometimes it may be important. So right here, okay, so look at how I have 31 here and 31 here. In Excel you can tell if it's being viewed as a number because it's usually by default aligned on the right, and if it's being viewed as text, which means you can't use it for math anymore at that point, which is problematic, then it gets aligned to the left. So there's this function which is the value function, which can take something that's formatted as regular text. And sometimes you might think about this in terms of like a sequence of operations. Sometimes you might be taking maybe a substring out of a long block of text like this right here, and if you take a piece out of here, or even just the right side of the function, it's assuming this is all text to begin with. But then if you want it to be considered as a number in future operations, then maybe with a composition of functions in Excel, you would first get the substring out and then send that substring into the value function. So instead of A15, you might say give me left of A3 in this case, you know, the certain number of characters or a substring in there, and then take the value of that. So you kind of have to nest your functions. Other things that will probably make good sense, there's this lower function. So take the text that's in this, in this case we're referencing C12, so take our modified text and turn it into all lowercase. The upper function turns it into all uppercase. This one is the proper function. It changes it into title case. And then here is kind of a find replace function, whereas before we just did regular replace and we were very specific about where we were going to start and end. This one is a little bit more broad. It says go into this function, or this word, D17, and replace all the spaces with a star. And you could even optionally limit the number of times that you do that. So you can modify text using these functions. And so here would be an example where it's the same function, replace in this text all the spaces with stars, but only do it in the third spot. So you can see that there are a lot of options as it relates to text functions. And these aren't all of them, but this is a good start. And this kind of stuff I think you could mostly look up in Excel and figure out what how to solve a problem related to any question that involved a problem that you might be given.